I don't know. I don't know where Jackson is, but let's just get going.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm gonna, I'll share my screen here. All right. Is everybody seeing my title slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. So before I kick us off, I do just want to say thanks to Doug and Courtney and Jackson and all of the other behind the scenes folks for organizing the summit and for also inviting a talk on green crab today. So I'm Alex Stote. I'm with Washington Sea Grant. I'm the coastal specialist for green crab at Washington Sea Grant. And also joining me is Ed Darcher, who most of you are probably familiar with from Pacific County Vegetation Management. So I'll kick us off and then I'll hand it to Ed a little bit later. So before I dive in, just some things that I'm planning on presenting today. First is the sort of idea of who's who in the Pacific County green crab trapping landscape. Over the last year, there's been a lot of activity, a lot of excitement around green crab. And so we've had sort of some new players jump into the scene, and I'll sort of orient everybody to who's doing what. I'll also talk a little bit about the different types of trapping that we're doing and why we employ different types of trapping to achieve various goals. And then I will attempt a 2021 field season review. Disclaimer that our field season is still ongoing. We will be trapping through the end of October. So everything that I share with you here today is up to date, but it's not necessarily the complete look at 2021. So come back to us in the winter and we'll have a little bit more to share after our field season wraps up. And then I'm going to compare what we've seen so far this year in 2021 to what we saw last year in 2020. And then we'll have a little bit of discussion on where do we go from here. And Ed will also share his experiences with trapping over the past season. Okay. So this is my team. As I mentioned, I'm the coastal coordinator, but there are so many folks that I work with at Washington Sea Grant on what we call our crab team, who support me and also the state management in scientific advisory services and various aspects of research on the coast, but also statewide. So, and I believe in the room with us here today, Emily Grayson, our program lead, and Sean McDonald from the UW program on the environment and SAFs are here joining today. So they can also help chime in if there's any questions at the end that we can all contribute to. And aside from our team, there are so many folks actively working on the coast towards this issue. So I just want to recognize that that this is really a multi-party collaborative approach, and we really couldn't do this work alone. And to give you just an idea of who is doing what where, I want to break it down real quickly into sort of the different spheres of green crab trapping on the coast and where different parties sort of plug in. So as I mentioned, I'm part of Washington Sea Grant Crab Team, and really our main role is through scientific advisory and capacity building. So we work on tracking status and impacts of green crab on the coast. And we also work towards helping train new folks who are interested in trapping, connecting them with DFW, getting their permits, and sort of plugging them into this wider network of folks who are working in green crab trapping. I also mentioned that there are statewide managers. So the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is the statewide manager for European green crab. Specifically, their Aquatic Invasive Species Unit is the department that oversees green crab management. But with them are co-managers in the state, and those are various tribes. And so tribes have jurisdiction, of course, over their land, and so they are managers as well in this landscape. And primarily the manager's role is to make the decisions regarding management and to also help prevent spread and remove green crab in our coastal estuaries. We have various other partners who sort of fall into this next category. These are folks like Pacific County Vegetation Management and like various shellfish growers who run Sentinel sites for us, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But these are folks who also participate in the removal of green crab and help also with early detection and reducing the chance of spread. And then the last sort of piece of this puzzle are the various researchers that we work with who ask the questions about what is the status of the green crab invasion? How can we improve our management? And really diving into these questions of where are green crabs coming from? Are they impacting our coastal ecosystems? And if so, how? So there are various ways that people sort of interact in the green crab landscape. And so hopefully this is just sort of an overview of how people plug into different areas. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the various types of trapping that we do. And I wanted to include this photo. You'll see Ed in the background there wrangling the airboat, where I think we're at some remote location, maybe on the Bear River, if this is triggering any memories, Ed. But I think that this photo really highlights that trapping for green crab is not light work. It's very time intensive, it's labor intensive, it's resource intensive. We go out into these field areas that are very muddy, as you can see from some footprints that are probably about 3 feet deep in this mud. We haul our traps in, we bait our traps, and then of course, remove any bycatching green crab that we're catching. So this is just to highlight that one person and one potty alone cannot tackle this issue of green crab removal. Really, it's a collective effort, and it takes a village. So I just wanted to say a shout out to other groups on the coast who are beginning to tackle this as well. So when we talk about trapping for green crab, there's actually various ways that we can do that, and we employ different strategies depending on what our goal is. And so this first trapping style, you may have heard me refer to is Sentinel site trapping. This is a very specific type of trapping that Washington Sea Grant co-operates with various partners on the coast. And so the point of Sentinel site trapping is to really get an understanding of seasonal patterns and ecological associations of green crabs at a specific location. And so our Sentinel sites are established sites. Again, we have 10 of them along various parts of the coast, and we set very few traps and we collect lots of data. And this is spread over a 6-month period. So once a month from April to September, our partners are setting a string of 6 traps. They're really taking data on everything that's in the traps. And the point is to figure out really how green crab patterns of abundance or distribution might be changing over time. And so really setting them every month in the same place is what can give us that close look on how they might be moving in a space over time. So that's very different than another type of trapping that we call prospecting or assessment style trapping. This style of trapping is when we go out to a new location and we set as many traps as we possibly can, sort of in a contained area. And really what we're setting out to do when we're employing assessment trapping is to get a snapshot of green crabs in a certain place, a snapshot of their range, their relative abundance, and the habitat that they might be using. This is a really important type of trapping because it gives us information as to where green crabs are and where they are not. And it also helps us detect new hotspots that we can then focus on for this last type of trapping, which is removal trapping. And so the goal of removal trapping is very simple: remove as many green crab as you can in the most efficient way. So with removal trapping, we will, in areas where we know there's a high green crab density, we will return to these sites, again, set as many traps as we can and remove as many green crabs as we can. In these type of efforts, we're not collecting as much data on everything else. We're really just trying to remove green crabs. And together, these 3 types of trapping are what help us focus on hotspots, detect new hotspots, and also understand how green crab are existing in a space, using a space, or varying across habitats. So you'll hear me sort of talk about each of these for the rest of the presentation. So now I want to give you all sort of a quick look into our 2021 findings, what I'm calling them. Again, disclaimer, we're still towards the end of the field season. It's not totally over. So our data is still preliminary. But in this map, you're looking at those orange boxes represent where our 10 Sentinel sites are. So you'll see down here in Willapa, we have 5 Sentinel sites that are distributed throughout the bay. Again, this is the type of trapping where it's few traps set every single month over the course of the field season. And what we've seen so far this year is that we've collectively had 324 traps in the water to remove a total of 260 green crabs. I want to say a special thank you to people who run these sites for us. So these are not sites that I go out and do myself. These are sites that various shellfish growers or agencies sort of run and manage and operate themselves. And Sea Grant really just provides the support for them to do that. They're the ones out there every month doing the work. And sort of in this picture, you can get an idea of what a Sentinel site transect looks like. This photo is actually from Brady's Oysters and Grays. Now I'll do a recap of our assessment trapping or prospective trapping from this last year. So again, this is where we'll go to a new place over a wide geography and put as many traps in the water as we can. In 2021, we visited 39 new sites that we hadn't been to in 2020. We set over 2,000 traps and removed over 800 green crabs in these new locations. This data, these numbers are specifically combined from Washington Sea Grant and DFW efforts. They do not reflect the other trapping that Ed has been doing with Pacific County or the other trapping that Shoalwater Bay has been doing independently as well. And they also do not reflect the independent trapping that the Makah tribe has been doing up north. So this is just a snapshot of what sort of we have ready to share right now. And then the last type of trapping that I talked about was removal trapping. This year, we and DFW have returned several times to ocean shores to conduct removal trapping. Last year in 2020, we discovered ocean shores as one of the hotspots for green crab. I had the highest abundance of anywhere we trapped on the coast. And so this year, it was targeted as a removal location. Removal is, again, when you visit the same site multiple times and just try to remove as many green crab as you can. So we've visited the site a couple times. We've set under 300 traps and we've removed over 1,400 green crabs. Shoalwater Bay and the Makah tribe and Pacific County have also been doing their own removal efforts where they're revisiting sites and removing green crab. And so I just want to call it again, they're doing additional work and that's just not reflected in these numbers here yet. So just sort of a snapshot into ocean shores. And in this photo here, this is actually a photo we took recently. We were in Ocean Shores last week and hand captured quite a few green crab that were mating. And so what you see here is a male green crab sort of clasping or holding on to a female green crab right before they're about to mate. So this is just a coast-wide snapshot of the data that we have so far from this year. The bubbles represent our average capture rate of green crab. So we talk about green crab, not in the pure numbers of green crab that we've removed, but what the average catch rate is in a place. Because removing 100 green crabs from 20 traps is very different than moving 100 green crabs from 100 traps. And so really this number sort of gets at what the density of green crab might be in a place. It refers to, these numbers here refer to the number of green crabs that we would catch if we set 100 traps in a place. So the higher these numbers, obviously, the higher density of green crab. And what we're seeing here in these bigger bubbles are where the sort of hot spots are from 2021 that we've observed so far. So in some of these locations with the bigger bubbles, we'll go in and we will remove bags of green crab like this just from a single trap. This type of density is really what we see in ocean shores and then also near the mouth of Willapa Bay in places like Tokeland or Nakata. So to focus in on Willapa Bay, so far I've been talking coastwide. To focus in on Willapa Bay, what we see is, in addition to what we sort of saw last year, is that green crab are currently broadly distributed throughout Grays Harbor as well as Willapa Bay. You see that we've really tried to get a broad distribution of trapping around the bay to sort of get at where green crabs are and where they're not. And we're consistently coming up with a pattern that typically if we're trapping for green crab, we will find it. We've noticed that the highest densities continue to be at locations closer to the mouth of the bay. So Nakata and Stackpole, as well as Tokeland and the Freshwater Creek area over here. One new thing that was really interesting this year, last year when we were sort of going through our communications over the winter, there were a lot of questions about the Columbia River and whether green crab could persist in some of these sort of offshoots of the Columbia. We did do a very broad scale assessment in the Columbia this summer, and we caught no green crab in any of the locations that we trapped. That being said, we uncovered a few recently molted green crabs right sort of at the edge where Cape Disappointment is, in a little lagoon that's sort of secluded. So not directly on the Columbia River, actually closer to the coast. But that outermost point was the only area where we had pulled up just a few green crab. Anything on the river, we came up with nothing. And the last thing I want to mention is that what this map does not reflect is seasonality, or I should say seasonality is not reflected in this map. And that's an important piece to remember because we go out and we trap from April to October. And so those sort of shoulder months in April and October, we expect the densities of green crab to be lower in those months than they might be when we're trapping over the sort of peak summer months. And so I think a good example of this is Bay Center, where we trapped in April. The density of green crab in Bay Center in April was on the lower end. But because when we're doing these sort of broad range trapping efforts, it's really hard for us to return to a place over the course of a season unless we know that it's a hotspot area that we do want to target for removal. So in Bay Center, for example, we found a lot of, in the Neowacum, we found a lot of fresh green crab molts, but we weren't catching a lot of green crab. And that again can be sort of a trend in seasonality if they're not coming to traps that early. And so while this map can be a tool that we use to hone in on hotspots, there are some nuances to understand about seasonality and to keep in mind that not all of these places were trapped at the same time. So it's not a perfect comparison between sites. So I want to just take a look at 2021 compared to what we found last year. In general, there was either an increase in crab density in sites that were resampled this year, or the density stayed about consistent. So we really didn't see any drop-offs in green crab numbers compared to 2020. We were able to trap a full 7 months this year compared to, or by the end of October, it will be a full 7 months compared to only 3 months where we were able to trap last year due to COVID restrictions. So this allowed us to cover a lot more ground this year and allowed us to get into places that we haven't been before. I'm supposed to be clicking as I'm talking to point out some of these things to you. So let me just go back to the hotspots real quick. I wanted to just point out that they are about the same as they were last year, although some increase if you look at Nakata, that that was an increase in density compared to last year so far is what we've seen. So we were able to set twice as many traps this year compared to last year, just in Willapa alone. This doesn't include Grays Harbor numbers. And we were able to trap in 10 new general regions in the Bay. This presentation, this map is really the first look that we're taking comparing last year to this year. And so a lot of work still needs to be done in the off season to sort of process our data and spatially analyze differences that we've seen between years. You all are getting the first peek preliminary results. So that's exciting, but we do still have more to sort of dig into here and untangle. So as we sort of begin to wrap up our field season, we ask the questions of what's next. This was a wild, crazy, busy field season. Obviously getting 1,500 traps in the water is no small feat. We plan to continue our partnership development, especially on the coast. We hear a lot from folks who are interested in getting involved, interested in sort of taking up this issue. And the truth is we want to continue to cultivate those partnerships and really work together to figure out how we can most effectively remove green crab from these estuaries. There's a lot of off-season coordination that needs to happen in order for that sort of coordinated approach to go efficiently. We hope to continue to work with folks to expand their capacity, support them in ways that they might need to do their own trapping. And lastly, we really need to think pretty hard about this last one in terms of developing targeted removal plans for various regions in the Bay. So with that, I wanted to make sure that I saved enough time for Ed to share his perspective, as well as enough time for questions. So I'm certainly happy to take any clarifying questions after Ed's piece, and we can sort of tag team that section together. But I think for now, I'll turn it over to you, Ed.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. I don't seem, I'm going to leave the video off, I think,
okay.
and read just, I got a script here and it'd probably be easier so I'm not distracted by myself. Anyway, this is Ed Darcher, Pacific County Vegetation Management. In September last year, 20, and when I say we, I'm meaning Seth Flamettis, fellow who was in a photo that Alex had earlier. Seth was hired this May as our green crab technician. We learned of a trapping conducted by the Shoalwater Tribe and Washington Sea Grant. I think it was last August, maybe September. Early September, in which they caught something like 500 crab, Alex, in a week. And that just seemed like a whole lot to us. We had been seeing molts during our season out in the Bay with our invasive weed work. And we've also saw some live ones, and it seemed like something was up. So I started researching and learning more about them. And it became evident that there was a problem. It wasn't that we were looking for something to do, it just we were in a position to do something. Now, Sea Grant ended their season, and at that time we saw, decided to go see for ourselves what was out there, while also continuing our invasive weed surveys. We saw this as an opportunity to contribute to what we saw as an emerging problem like Spartina, and also provide a sense of urgency of the situation. It was just at that time, we did not know that much about Sea Grant's plans and their background in the Bay. And it seemed to us that if, somebody needed to be continuing this over the winter and into the spring of this year. Let's see. we wanted to be proactive and do what we could. So we took the initiative. We started using converted aquipurses that we have found over the shoreline over the seasons by, pretty rudimentary stuff. We would put a cone on the sides, and our first trap was pulled October 2nd of last year. And let's see, since then, we've set a total of 783 traps, capturing 2,989 crab. We'll call that 3,000 since last October, and over 2,500 this year, at approximately a 2-to-1 male to female ratio. And we'll probably continue for another month or so. So I expect that we'll add another 400 or 500 more. So we'll probably end up the season with about 3,500. And 3,000 this year. Our biggest catch in one day, in one haul, this is with 30 traps, was 259 green crab. And in one trap, we got 34. It really varies in situations where you are. We started from scratch. We didn't know, we were learning as we're going. And let's see. We wanted to establish credibility, legitimacy, and we worked with Sea Grant, Washington Fish and Wildlife to establish protocol procedure and try to get up and be as professional as they were in our endeavors. We collected data from each trap, including number, sex, location, bycatch, and mortality, which has been very low. We obtained a Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife permit and have complied with their requirements. We've trapped every month. We trapped over the winter and increased it in the spring. We started in Lower Palix and the Will Palmetto between Johnson and Tower Sloughs, and we expanded in this spring to include Tokeland, Freshwater Creek around Hawks Point, to the Smith Creek Meadow, from the South Bend ramp west of Carruthers Slough, the Neowacum, which we're going to do this coming week, a follow up to where Alex was earlier in the season. Also Stanley Point south through what they call the upper pot shots. We've updated and learned a lot. We have changed some of our procedures from as far as staking and walking in the sloughs. We use a lot of rope and gill net floats. We weight some down with rebar. We not only do the upper tidelands, but we'll try trenches and deeper channels too. We sometimes refer to ourselves as the least dangerous catch. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, we've assisted Sea Grant and Washington DFW are on good working terms with the Shorewater Tribes environmental team. We've worked together with them on several locations. We started out prospecting. We caught green crab in just about in every location we set traps, and our original intent was to document the extent of an infestation. But that changed when we started seeing significant numbers in certain areas. Our focus then became removal, see as many as we could take out the impact and see if there was a change in the areas where we were concentrating our traps. I want to pass some quotes from the East Coast where there's been significant impact. The only known method that holds promise is early detection and subsequent removal of as many individuals as possible. Physical control trapping is the most environmentally sound and cost-effective option for controlling green crab. And this one, till invasive species become a problem, it's not a problem. We don't know, at least from my perch, exactly what the impact will be in Willapa Bay, but it can't be good, excuse me. So then the question is, where do we go from here? I think Alex outlined an excellent menu of establishing partnerships and hitting hotspots and so forth. But there's, of course, comes down to the nut of who's going to fund it, who's responsible for areas, the coordination, what's going to happen. I know that the Shoalwater Tribe's environmental team has recently purchased over $5,000 worth of traps for control in their part of the bay. And we, that means vegetation management, hopes to assist their efforts to remove as many as we can in the north part in 2022. I also believe that Willapa National Wildlife Refuge plans to include European green crab in their 2022 budget request. And that's it for me. I guess we'll open up questions. I want to say that my responses may reflect my own opinions and personal perspective, and not necessarily the weed board or commissioners or anybody else.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Ed.
Yep.
Do we have some time for questions if there are any? I can stop sharing my screen as well.
Yeah, we do have time for questions because we have Curtis not here this afternoon, so we have some flexibility here.
I have a question. If you're looking for places in the bay for more private traps or individual volunteers to get involved, where would you like to see that happen?
When you talk about private traps, Kathleen, are you asking about the Sentinel sites, for example, or are you talking about new locations for those like one-time assessment or prospective trapping?
Well, with Bayside landowners, we may have people interested in having traps and collecting crab, and we're wondering where the focus ought to be if we're seeing hot spots. And especially around Nakata, if it would help to have more people running their own traps and contributing data, basically. And it could fall into any category I think that you want. Also, if you're looking for sites and need help with private landowners, is that something that we could help with?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. With the Sentinel sites, with establishing new Sentinel sites, we are concentrated mostly on the distribution of those sites rather than the quantity of those sites. So as it sits now, I'm not sure we would necessarily be adding more for 2022, but when it comes to things like assessment trapping, we are interested in going to new locations as well as continuing to try to sort of parse out where those hotspots might be. So I think the answer to your question is yes, and we should connect maybe more about some of those possibilities.
Well, my follow-on question is, have you identified the habitat characteristics that indicate you might have an area really attractive to green crab?
Yeah, so we know that green crab are, you're not looking at my screen anymore. I was just going to talk about this photo. But some of the photos that I was showing are sort of those muddy, channelized, slough, marshy areas. Green crab mostly will occupy all of those sort of that type of habitat. And the thing with Willapa and grays is that there's no real shortage of that type of habitat. So what we're seeing is that when we go into a lot of these channels, green crab will most likely be present. And so anything that sort of, when we do shore-based trapping, we're working up in the higher marsh, and also Ed and with his airboat can sort of take us into marshes that are not necessarily accessible from the mainland. And those areas are the ones that we mostly always target. We're not so much targeting subtidal or middle of the bay, but it is really sort of those higher up channelized habitats. And so the challenging answer is that it's like the habitat of Willapa Bay is what green crab will occupy.
Yeah, we have no shortage of channels and mud. That is certainly
Right.
true.
Right. And that's what we're finding in our assessments.
Well, I'll talk to you offline then about it. I've got a couple potential sites that where the landowners might be willing to give you access, and they are associated with the marshes, and there are channels.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathleen.
Brian, I have a couple of observations and a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I mean, absolutely no disrespect to anybody at all, but I'm extremely alarmed at the fact that we have the largest producer of cultivated shellfish in the nation, a crop slash livestock, and we have seen zero engagement that I'm aware of from the Department of Agriculture, who are the experts at pest management in the state of Washington, expected to deal with this kind of stuff in agriculture. I also wanted to provide a little oversight of what I've seen. And last year in about July was the first time I ever saw a green crab out in the bay. I didn't find it, but my crew did. It was about a mile north of the Port of Peninsula on one of our oyster seed beds. Found 2 or 3 of them in just a matter of 5 minutes, and they were all males and, large males. I didn't see any more. Than this year, I saw one out in Oysterville, just north of the Oysterville cannery, right out on the flats, fully exposed. About 3 weeks, maybe a month ago, I saw a large male right at the entrance to Whiskey Slough, which is about a half a mile north of the Port of Peninsula, the Port of Nakata. So we have an amazing expansion of these creatures, and I think it's kind of flying under the radar what the potential impact's going to be, because just from a commercial fisheries perspective, it's going to destroy those. And I got to tell you, it's hard to watch what's happening and how this whole thing's being managed. And I don't mean to disrespect anyone, but I'd like to see a lot more aggressive eradication effort happening, and I'm not seeing it. Trapping's great. If the agencies hadn't dropped the ball for about 10 years, I think we wouldn't have this problem. These things came from Stackpole and Willapa Bay. If you look at all the data, it sort of shows where the population center is. We dropped the ball, stopped trapping, and they exploded across the state. And now they've moved north, and since they're in Puget Sound, we're getting a lot of attention now, of course. So the other thing I've seen is, and I've brought this and spread it out as much as I could starting about 4 months ago, was the infestation of the old Spartina clones. And I've dug into the clones in Oysterville and Stackpole, and the one I found in Whiskey Slough was at a burrow going into an old Spartina clone site. And I guess the question is, has anyone done any monitoring? Has there been any action to start to document that or look at it? Or, because if you have these things contained in a sort of centralized area, and I might add, you've got one invasive species that created habitat that now another invasive species appears to be using as its home away from home all along the peninsula. And those areas could be eradicated with a rototilling device, which I know U.S. Fish and Wildlife used to have one they ground up Spartina with. And I haven't seen anything happening to look at that issue of them populating Spartina. Are you aware of anything, Alex, that's going on, or is there a plan to start looking at things like what are they eating up there? Whether it's cameras or something happening.
Yeah. So first, I'll say I understand your frustration with the issue. I think we're all getting to a point where we can agree that we need to really increase the removal efforts. Next, I'll say that I have visited some of those Spartina hummocks. I think maybe some of the same ones that that you're thinking of. I visited with David Bagley, and we did dig out some green crab as well. The short answer is no extended monitoring is happening in those habitats right now. My thoughts are that where we see the hotspots for green crab in places like Tokeland and Ocean Shores, there is not that Spartina hummock habitat. And so I'm not sure that even if these habitat types were removed, that green crab wouldn't just take up habitat elsewhere. It doesn't seem like, as I was sort of responding to Kathleen, there is an abundance of great habitat for green crab to use in Willapa Bay. And so I'm not convinced that by removing those Spartina hummocks, the green crab wouldn't just find somewhere else to go, given what opportunistic invaders they are. Part of the reason they're such a successful invasive species is because they are very adaptive and resilient. And so focusing in on that sort of one niche, I'm not sure is necessarily the most effective management tool, or at least use of our time right now when we know that we have hotspots where they are just thriving and in different habitat types, if that makes sense. And I know that we're over time. I know Nansen, we probably don't want to delay you much more. I know Lee has had her hand up, so I'll look to conference organizers to see, can we take another question?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
I want to respond to something there too,
Yeah.
when you're done, Alex.
No, you go ahead, Ed.
All right, Brian. It's not, aquatic invasive species is under Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife's domain. It's an RCW, you're probably aware of that, and ag has no foundation to approach the situation.
Yeah, they do in agriculture, Ed, maybe not in the general marine area, but agriculture, they got all the jurisdiction. Plus, under the aquatic farm registration program, it's required that Fish and Wildlife work with the state veterinarian on these kinds of issues. Not just maybe, required.
Well, then we need to get our legislatures, so you guys are representatives going, but
I agree.
there's
Something
no
needs
money,
to
ag
happen.
has no money for it.
Yeah, well, they're paid, they exist to take care of agriculture. So.
Hey, I'm not gonna argue, I just,
Yeah.
They've got no dog in this fight as far as I knew.
Well, obviously, they don't seem to think they do, but I don't know what to tell you, but I mean, I just am shocked that we're letting an estuary get overrun. And I'm only talking about the agricultural part of it, but there are several other commercial species that are going to be affected. And I'm not, recreational lands, Fish and Wildlife, yes. Other lands, public lands, Fish and Wildlife, or private lands, Fish and Wildlife. But if they're commercial agriculture lands, they are Department of Ag.
Well, I will ask somebody higher up here in my own up in the Spartina. Anyway, also, I think it's as much the individual landowners now who need to take care of their own property. I mean, if you've got, could you put out your own traps?
I'd rather spray them with carbaryl.
Wait,
Well,
I've been waiting a long time, and what I want to ask is relevant here. So, Alex, would you explain the permit requirements and the rationale for the permits? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Lee. And thanks for, I know you've had your hand up for a while. So, and I see in the chat, tell us what to do, tell us where to trap so we can help. So I will preface this by saying I am not a DFW representative. So permitting, I'm aware of the permitting process, but it doesn't fall necessarily squarely into my wheelhouse. And so you are required, basically green crab are in an invasive species level 3, I believe. I'm going to look to Sean and Emily in the room to back me up here. And so you are required to have a permit to possess green crab in the state of Washington. And so folks who are interested in trapping need to obtain a permit from DFW in order to do so. In the Sentinel site program, we provide permits to those who are trapping for us, sort of under the umbrella of the program. And we haven't so far, because this is an issue that continues to just grow in excitement and sort of motivation. So we haven't come to the point where DFW, as far as I know, has issued individual permits to landowners yet at this point. They have issued permits to shellfish growers and to agencies like Pacific County Vegetation Management. I think the homeowner question is very interesting. But yes, even if it is your private land, you would require at this point a permit to be able to trap. And thank you, Emily, for correcting me there. Green crabs are a designated level 1, not level 3. Yeah, I think hopefully that answers your permit question, Lee. Oh, you were asking why. The why, I think Emily has answered here in the chat, that they are at level 1, they're the highest designation for risk of spread, and therefore you need a permit to possess them.
Yeah, Alex, I'm not aware of any shellfish grower who has a permit. We were asked to get one in the association and we did not.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need a permit. I don't know. I would say it's kind of insane that anybody would need a permit, honestly, to eradicate an invasive species.
Yeah, I know part of the permit requirements are that, sometimes folks mis-ID green crab. And so you end up going out and trapping and keeping what you think are green crabs, but they're actually our native crabs. And so the permit also comes with a bit of education on ID as well as best trapping practices. I'm just monitoring the chat. Yeah, I don't know. I think we are about 11 minutes over now. So Ed, do you want to have the final word and then we can hand it over to
I'm
Nick?
glad. No, I'm enjoying. Well, I'm not enjoying, but I'm glad. Yeah, the permit police are going to get after you, Brian. Anyway,
The permit police.
Well, every time I see one, I smash it with a rake. So
no, you gotta freeze them.
sorry, dead on arrival.
Yeah, no comment. We county complied with, we had to be very observant of the rules and, remain. So I do think, though, that it is the landowner's responsibility to get rid of whatever they can on their own property. And it may be setting up somehow a trapping program within the county if somebody wants green crab removed, but it comes down to money too. And funding. That's pretty much it I don't know, are we done?
Yeah, I'll just say that, the coastal green crab conversation is not over. This is, again, the sort of first look at our 2021 field season. And usually we do have a coastal partner and stakeholder meeting. And so I encourage folks to keep an eye open for that. It's a really good way to interface with DFW and other folks who are in this community doing trapping. So hopefully this was just a good teaser. And I'm also happy to answer any other questions offline so that we can really save some time for Nansen now. And thank you for being flexible with your scheduling too, Nansen. Appreciate it.
I got one more. I'd just like to give a shout out to Alex. She's just been exceptional to work with. She's bright. You should see her work in the field, extremely hard work, and she's got a great attitude. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Ed. I'm blushing. Thank you.
All right, gang.